The deal was worth $600 million. The tension in the room was sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus Thorne, the most feared CEO in New York, was watching his empire crumble over a plate of cold risotto, all because his hired translator was an idiot. The Italians were insulted. The contract was about to be shredded. Nobody looked at the girl filling the water glasses. Nobody cared about the waitress in the cheap uniform. But they should have, because while the CEO was losing his mind and the translator was stuttering, the invisible girl in the corner was the only person in the room who knew that the Italians weren't just angry. They were planning a hostile takeover, and she was about to break every rule to stop them. The crash of expensive porcelain shattered the silence of l'Orangerie, Manhattan's most pretentious French restaurant. "You clumsy, useless waste of space." The shrill voice belonged to Jessica, the floor manager. She stood over Elena, her face twisted in a sneer that cracked through her heavy foundation. On the floor, amidst the shards of a $50 plate, lay Elena Vance, on her hands and knees, frantically picking up the pieces. "I'm so sorry, Jessica," Elena whispered, her hands shaking. "The floor was slick. I don't care about your excuses," Jessica hissed, checking her reflection in the darkened window to ensure her hair was perfect. "Tonight is the most important night in the history of this restaurant. Do you know who booked the private gold room? Marcus Thorne." Elena froze. Everyone knew Marcus Thorne. He was the CEO of Thorne Global, a man who graced the cover of Forbes and GQ in the same month. He was known for two things: his terrifying business acumen and his absolute intolerance for incompetence. "He's meeting with the Rossi family," Jessica continued, lowering her voice to a dramatic whisper as if discussing state secrets. "Giovanni Rossi, the king of Italian luxury textiles. If this dinner goes well, Thorne Global acquires Rossi's supply chain. It's a $500 million merger. If it goes badly, well, let's just say l'Orangerie can't afford to be the place where the deal died." Elena nodded, carefully placing the shards onto a tray. "I understand. I'll be invisible." "See that you are," Jessica snapped. "You are strictly on water duty. Do not speak to the guests. Do not look them in the eye. And for the love of God, do not breathe near the food. I've hired a professional translator, Arthur, who will be seated at the table. You are nothing but furniture. Got it?" "Yes, ma'am." Elena stood up, smoothing down her black apron. She was 24, with tired eyes and hands roughened by harsh detergents. Nobody at l'Orangerie knew much about her, and Jessica preferred it that way. To them, she was just the girl who took the extra shifts nobody wanted. They didn't know that 3 years ago, Elena had been a top student at the University of Siena in Tuscany. They didn't know she had spent her summers in Florence restoring Renaissance art, living with a host family who spoke no English. They didn't know that she could debate philosophy in the dialect of Rome and haggle prices in the slang of Naples. But life had been cruel. Her father's sudden heart failure had dragged her back to New York. The medical bills from Mount Sinai Hospital were drowning them. She had sold her books, her art supplies, and her dreams to pay for his medication. Now, she wasn't a scholar. She was a waitress making minimum wage plus tips, ruled by a manager who hated her. "Move it, Vance," Jessica barked. "They're here." The heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Marcus Thorne walked in first. He was taller than he looked on TV, wearing a custom charcoal Brioni suit that probably cost more than Elena's entire year of rent. His jaw was set tight, his blue eyes scanning the room with predatory precision. He radiated power, but also a tight-coiled tension. He needed this deal. Rumors on Wall Street whispered that Thorne Global was over-leveraged. He needed the Italian prestige to save his stock price. Behind him waddled Arthur, the translator. He was a sweaty man in an ill-fitting suit, clutching a leather portfolio like a shield. And then, the Italians. Giovanni Rossi was a lion of a man, even in his 70s. He wore a cream-colored linen suit and a silk scarf, flanked by his two sons, Lorenzo and Matteo. They looked around the restaurant with open disdain. "Is this it?" Giovanni muttered in Italian, his voice gravelly. "È un po', Pretenzioso, no? Sembra un funerale. It's a bit pretentious, isn't it? Looks like a funeral. Elena, standing by the water station, bit her lip to keep from smiling. Arthur, the translator, bowed deeply. Welcome, Mr. Thorne is very happy. Happy to see you. Giovanni looked at Arthur, then at Marcus. He didn't smile. Right this way. Jessica cooed, her voice suddenly dripping with honey as she guided them toward the gold room. She shot Elena a glare that promised murder if she messed up. Elena grabbed the crystal pitcher of ice water. Her hands were steady, but her heart was pounding. She had a bad feeling. She had heard Giovanni's tone. That wasn't the tone of a man looking to sell his company. That was the tone of a man looking for a fight. The gold room was a private enclave separated from the main dining floor by heavy velvet curtains. A single round table was set with Christoffel silverware and crystal glasses. The air smelled of expensive truffle oil and anxiety. Elena stood in the shadows against the wall, perfectly still, holding the water pitcher. Marcus Thorne sat opposite Giovanni Rossi. The tension was palpable. Marcus signaled for the wine, a 1982 Chateau Margaux. Arthur, Marcus said, his voice smooth but commanding. Please tell Signor Rossi that it is an honor to host him, and I hope he finds the terms of the preliminary contract agreeable. Arthur cleared his throat nervously. He wiped sweat from his upper lip. Si. He turned to Giovanni. Signor Rossi, il signor Thorne dice che è un onore e spera che il contratto sia buono. Mr. Thorne says it is an honor and hopes the contract is good. Elena flinched. It was grammatically correct, barely, but it lacked all the nuance and respect required for a man of Rossi's stature. It was like speaking to a child. Giovanni narrowed his eyes. Il contratto è aggressivo, Giovanni said sharply, leaning forward. Volete smantellare i nostri laboratori in Toscana per risparmiare. Per noi, la qualità è tutto. Per voi, è solo profitto. Elena understood perfectly. The contract is aggressive. You want to dismantle our workshops in Tuscany to save money. For us, quality is everything. For you, it is only profit. It was a scathing accusation, a deal-breaker. Arthur turned to Marcus, looking panicked. He evidently hadn't caught the part about the workshops. Mr. Thorne, he says, the contract is aggressive. He says for them quality is important. And you like profit. Marcus frowned. He missed the specific fear about the Tuscany workshops, because Arthur didn't translate it. Marcus thought it was just a standard negotiation tactic about money. Tell him, Marcus said, his voice hardening, that profit protects quality. Without our distribution network, his, quality, will sit in a warehouse gathering dust. We are doing him a favor. Elena's eyes widened. No, don't say that, she thought. That's too arrogant. Arthur turned to the Italians. Il signor Thorne dice che, senza I suoi soldi, la vostra qualità è spazzatura. Vi sta facendo un favore. Elena nearly dropped the pitcher. Arthur had mistranslated dust and distribution, and essentially said, without his money, your quality is garbage. He is doing you a favor. The reaction was instantaneous. Giovanni Rossi's face turned a violent shade of red. His sons, Lorenzo and Matteo, stood up, knocking their chairs back. Spazzatura? Giovanni roared, slamming his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. La nostra seta ha vestito papi e re. E questo americano arrogante ci chiama spazzatura? Garbage? Our silk has dressed popes and kings. And this arrogant American calls us garbage? Marcus looked confused. He didn't know what had just been said, but he saw the anger. Arthur, what did he say? What's happening? I think he's upset about the price, Arthur stammered, terrified. He's very emotional. Italians are very emotional, sir. Fix it, Marcus snapped. Tell him we can raise the offer by 10%. Arthur turned back to Giovanni. Il signor Thorne vi offre il 10% in più per calmarvi. Mr. Thorne offers you 10% more to calm you down. It was the worst possible thing to say. It implied Giovanni could be bought off like a petulant child. Giovanni spat on the floor, right onto the expensive plush carpet of the gold room. Andiamo, he commanded his sons. Questo incontro è finito. E diremo a tutti in Italia che la Thorne Global non ha onore. Let's go. This meeting is over, and we will tell everyone in Italy that Thorne Global has no honor. The deal wasn't just dead. It was going to cause a scandal that would ruin Marcus's reputation in Europe. Marcus stood up, panic flashing in his eyes for the first time. Wait! Arthur, stop them! What is going on? Arthur was hyperventilating. I don't know. They're crazy. They just started shouting. Jessica burst through the velvet curtains, having heard the shouting. She saw the disaster unfolding, the Rossi family storming toward the exit, Marcus Thorne looking furious and confused, and Arthur shaking like a leaf. What happened? Jessica screeched, looking at Elena. Vance! Did you drop something? Did you disturb them? No, Elena said quietly. She looked at Marcus. He looked desperate. He was watching $600 million walk out the door because of a translation error. She looked at her shoes. She thought about her rent. She thought about Jessica's warning. Invisible. Furniture. Then she thought about her father's heart medication. If she got fired, they were doomed. But if Marcus Thorne lost this deal, he might destroy the restaurant in his rage anyway. Giovanni Rossi was reaching for the curtain. Elena took a breath. It was a risk. A massive, career-ending risk. Aspetti! Signor Rossi! Her voice rang out, clear and melodic, cutting through the chaos. It wasn't the tentative, broken Italian of Arthur. It was perfect, accented with the rolling cadence of Siena. The room froze. Giovanni stopped, his hand on the velvet fabric. He turned slowly, looking for the source of the voice. His eyes landed on the waitress holding the water pitcher. Marcus turned to her, his brow furrowed. Jessica looked like she was about to tackle Elena to the ground. You shut your mouth, Jessica hissed under her breath, grabbing Elena's arm. Get to the kitchen, now! Elena ripped her arm away from Jessica. She didn't look at her manager. She looked straight at the furious Italian patriarch. Me perdoni per l'interruzione, Elena said, stepping forward, her posture changing from submissive waitress to confident speaker. Ma il traduttore ha commesso un errore grave. Il signor Thorne non ha mai detto che la vostra qualità è spazzatura. Forgive the interruption, but the translator made a grave error. Mr. Thorne never said your quality was garbage. Giovanni looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. E chi sei tu? Una cameriera? And who are you? A waitress? Sono una persona che odia vedere l'arte distrutta da parole sbagliate, Elena replied smoothly. Il signor Thorne ha detto che senza una rete di distribuzione, anche la qualità migliore raccoglie polvere. Non spazzatura. Polvere. Voleva dire che il mondo ha bisogno di vedere il vostro lavoro non che non vale niente. I am someone who hates to see art destroyed by wrong words. Mr. Thorne said without a distribution network, even the best quality gathers dust. Not garbage, dust. He meant the world needs to see your work, not that it is worthless. Giovanni paused. The rage in his face wavered slightly. He looked at Marcus, then back to Elena. Is this true? Giovanni asked in broken English, testing her. Elena turned to Marcus. Mr. Thorne, she said, switching to English, your translator told Mr. Rossi that you called his life's work garbage and then offered him money to calm him down. That is why they are leaving. Marcus's face went pale. He turned a glare of absolute incineration upon Arthur. Arthur whimpered and shrank back against the wall. I said... Dust, Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. I said it would gather dust. I corrected it, Elena said calmly. I told him you respect his art too much to let it sit in a warehouse. Marcus looked at Elena. For a second, the CEO and the waitress locked eyes. He saw intelligence there. Sharp, undeniable intelligence that didn't fit the uniform. Tell him, Marcus commanded, pointing at Elena, that I am firing this idiot translator immediately. And ask him to please sit down. And tell him I want to visit the Tuscany workshops personally to understand the heritage." Elena turned back to Giovanni. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Signor Rossi, se permettete, il signor Thorne vorrebbe licenziare l'idiota e vorrebbe venire a Toscana, ospite vostro, per imparare la storia che ci è dietro la seta. Per favore, non lasciate che un errore linguistico distrugga un futuro d'oro." Giovanni stared at her. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Jessica was trembling by the door, terrified. Then, Giovanni let out a short, sharp laugh. He looked at Arthur. "Via! Fuori!" he barked at the trembling man. "Go!" Out. Arthur scrambled out of the room like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Giovanni walked back to the table and sat down. He gestured to the empty chair beside him, the chair meant for the translator. He pointed a manicured finger at Elena. "Tu," Giovanni said. "Siediti. Tu traduci. You. Sit. You translate." Jessica gasped. "Mr. Thorne, she is just a waitress. She isn't qualified to—" "Jessica," Marcus said, not looking away from Elena. "Get her a clean blazer, now, and if you interrupt again, you're fired." Elena set the water pitcher down on the side table. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was sitting at the table with $1 billion on the line. But she didn't know that the real danger wasn't the negotiation. The real danger was that Marcus Thorne was starting to look at her not as a tool, but as a mystery he wanted to solve. And Jessica, watching from the shadows, was already plotting her revenge. The silence in the gold room was heavy, but it was no longer the silence of impending doom. It was the silence of calculation. Elena sat on the edge of the velvet chair, her back straight. She felt ridiculous wearing a waiter's uniform at a table where a single bottle of wine cost more than her car, but she pushed the feeling down. She had a job to do. Marcus Thorne was watching her. He wasn't even looking at the Italians anymore. He was watching her translate. He noticed how she didn't just repeat words, she filtered them. When Giovanni Rossi rambled for 2 minutes about the soul of the olive trees near his factory, Elena summarized it to Marcus as, "He is concerned that industrial expansion will disrupt the local agriculture, which affects his community standing. He needs a guarantee of environmental protection." Marcus raised an eyebrow. That was insightful. It was business intelligence, not just translation. "Tell him," Marcus said, leaning back, "that we will fund a local preservation trust. 1 million euros annually, tax-deductible for us. Good PR for him." Elena turned to Giovanni. "Il signor Thorne propone di creare un fondo per la protezione della terra, 1 milione di euro l'anno. Così voi proteggete la terra, e lui dimostra rispetto per la vostra casa." Giovanni nodded, impressed. The tension in his shoulders dropped. But the danger wasn't over. The 2 sons, Lorenzo and Matteo, were whispering to each other. They looked at Elena with suspicion. They didn't like that a waitress was deciphering their strategy. Lorenzo, the older son, leaned forward. He had a shark-like smile. He slid a document across the table toward Marcus. It was an addendum to the contract, written in dense, legal Italian. "Solo una piccola formalità," Lorenzo said smoothly. "Una garanzia sui tempi di consegna." Just a small formality. A guarantee on delivery times. Arthur, the previous translator, would have just said, "It's a delivery guarantee," and let Marcus sign it. Elena picked up the paper, she scanned it, her eyes narrowed. She read it again. The clause seemed standard, a penalty for late payments, but the phrasing was tricky. It used the term giorni lavorativi, working days, but defined the calendar according to the quote-quote calendario locale di Siena, local calendar of Siena. Elena's mind flashed back to her time in Siena. She remembered the festivals, the paleo, the strikes, the saints, days. In Siena, the local calendar had almost 40 non-working days more than the standard American calendar. If Marcus signed this, he would be expecting shipments on days when the entire region was shut down. He would technically be in breach of contract every single month, triggering massive penalty fees that would flow directly into the Rossi brothers' pockets. It was a trap. A clever, subtle trap to bleed Thorne Global dry via penalties. "What is it?" Marcus asked, seeing her hesitation. "Is it standard?" Lorenzo smiled at Marcus. "Standard," he said in English. "Just schedule." Elena looked at Lorenzo. He glared at her, his eyes daring her to speak. "You're just a waitress," his eyes said. "Stay in your lane." Elena turned to Marcus. "Mr. Thorne, do not sign this." Marcus froze. "Why?" "It's a logic trap," Elena said, her voice steady. "They have defined the delivery schedule based on the local Sienese calendar. Are you aware that between the paleo races, the harvest festivals, and the local saints' days, the factories in that region are legally closed for nearly 6 weeks of scattered dates throughout the year?" Marcus's eyes widened. "If you sign this," Elena continued, "you will expect shipments on days they are legally closed. You will claim they are late. They will point to this clause. But worse, the reverse is true. If you require a rush order on those days, they can charge you a holiday premium of 300%. Based on your projected volume, this piece of paper would cost you $40 million in surcharges over 5 years. The room went dead silent. Marcus slowly turned his head toward Lorenzo. The look on the CEO's face was terrifying. It was the look of a man who had almost stepped on a landmine and now wanted to kill the person who planted it. "Is this true?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lorenzo turned pale. He started to stammer in Italian, but Giovanni, the father, slammed his hand on the table. Giovanni snatched the paper from his son's hand. He read it. His face darkened. He hadn't known. His sons had tried to sneak a profit clause past him too, risking the family honor for quick cash. "Idiotti!" Giovanni roared, slapping Lorenzo across the back of the head. "Volete truffare un partner? Volete dishonorare il nome Rossi? Idiots! You want to scam a partner? You want to dishonor the Rossi name?" Giovanni stood up and looked at Marcus. Then he looked at Elena. He bowed his head slightly to the waitress. "Grazie," Giovanni said to her. "Grazie per aver salvato il mio onore." "Thank you for saving my honor." He tore the paper in half. "Mr. Thorne," Giovanni said in heavily accented English, "no penalties. We do. Clean deal. Shake hands." Marcus stood up. He shook Giovanni's hand. The deal was done. $600 million secured. And it was bulletproof, thanks to the girl in the apron. The dinner wound down. The atmosphere was celebratory. Marcus was laughing with Giovanni, with Elena bridging the gap effortlessly. As the guests stood to leave, Marcus turned to Elena. For the first time all night, the adrenaline faded, and Elena realized how tired she was. "What is your name?" Marcus asked. "Elena," she said. "Elena Vance." "Elena," Marcus repeated, testing the sound of it. "You aren't a waitress." "I don't know what you are, but you aren't a waitress. I want you to come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Thorne Tower, 50th floor. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy black card with gold lettering, his personal business card. "Ask for my assistant, Preston. We need to talk about your future." Elena took the card. Her fingers brushed his. A spark, electric and undeniable, shot up her arm. She looked up, and for a moment, the restaurant faded away. It was just her and the blue-eyed billionaire who looked at her like she was the only valuable thing in the room. I'll be there," she whispered. "Good," Marcus said. He turned to leave, escorting the Rossi family out. Elena stood there, clutching the card to her chest, a smile breaking across her face. Finally, a break. Finally, a way out of the crushing debt. She could save her dad. She turned around to clear the table. And there stood Jessica. Jessica's face was a mask of pure, distilled hatred. She had been watching from the shadows near the kitchen door. She had seen the handshake. She had seen the card. "Give me that," Jessica said, her voice trembling with rage. "What?" Elena stepped back. "No, Mr. Thorne gave it to me." "Mr. Thorne is a guest," Jessica snapped, stepping forward and snatching the card from Elena's hand before she could react. "And guests often make mistakes when they've had too much wine. He doesn't want a rat like you in his office." "Give it back," Elena cried, reaching for it. Jessica held it high, then walked over to the table where a candle was still burning. "You embarrassed me tonight, Vance," Jessica hissed. "You stepped out of line. You made me look incompetent." "I saved the restaurant," Elena argued, tears springing to her eyes. "They were leaving!" "You humiliated the management," Jessica yelled. She held the corner of the black business card to the flame. Elena lunged, but she was too late. The card caught fire. The heavy paper curled and blackened, the gold letters melting away. Marcus Thorne's direct line, his private contact, turned to ash in seconds. Jessica dropped the burning remains into a glass of water. Hiss. "You're fired," Jessica said, smiling with cruel satisfaction. "Get your things and get out. If you ever come back here, I'll call the police and tell them you stole from the register. Who do you think they'll believe? The manager or the desperate girl with a mountain of debt?" Elena stared at the floating ash in the water glass. Her future, her father's heart medication, gone. She looked at Jessica, realizing there was no point in fighting. The system was built for people like Jessica. Elena untied her apron, let it drop to the floor, and walked out the back door into the rainy New York night. She had no job. She had no way to contact Marcus Thorne, and she had no idea that the story was far from over. The next morning, the sun rose over Manhattan, gleaming off the glass facade of Thorne Tower. Marcus Thorne sat in his office, drumming his fingers on his mahogany desk. It was 9:15 a.m. "Preston," he barked into the intercom. His executive assistant, a sharp young man named Preston, hurried in. "Yes, sir? The contracts with Rossi are being drafted. The legal team is ecstatic." "Forget the contracts," Marcus said, checking his watch. "Where is she?" "Who, sir?" "Elena Vance, the woman from the restaurant last night. I told her to be here at 9. Preston looked at his tablet. "I have no record of an appointment, sir, and security hasn't logged anyone by that name." Marcus frowned. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city. He wasn't used to being stood up. People didn't stand up Marcus Thorne. If he told someone to jump, they asked how high. If he offered someone a job, they camped out in the lobby the night before. "Maybe she got lost," Marcus muttered. "Or maybe she thinks I wasn't serious." He remembered her eyes, intelligent, sad, desperate. She needed this job. He had seen her shoes, worn out, cheap rubber soles. She wouldn't skip this meeting. "Get the car," Marcus said suddenly. "Sir, you have a board meeting in 20 minutes. "Cancel it." "But—" "I said cancel it, Preston. We're going to l'Orangerie." 30 minutes later, Marcus Thorne stormed through the front doors of l'Orangerie. The restaurant was closed for lunch prep, chairs stacked on tables. Jessica was at the host stand, organizing menus. When she saw Marcus Thorne, the billionaire CEO, walking toward her with a face like thunder, she dropped the menus. Her heart did a somersault of panic. "Mr. Thorne," she squeaked, putting on her best fake smile. We aren't open yet, but for you, of course." "Where is she?" Marcus demanded, cutting her off. He didn't have time for pleasantries. "Who?" Jessica feigned ignorance, though her hands were shaking. "Elena. The waitress. The one who saved the deal last night." Jessica's smile tightened. She had prepared for this. She knew he might come back. "Oh," Jessica sighed, shaking her head with fake disappointment. "Her. I'm so sorry, Mr. Thorne. I was hoping you wouldn't notice." "Notice what?" "We had to let her go," Jessica lied smoothly. "Last night, after you left. We caught her going through the Rossi family's coats in the cloakroom. She was trying to steal wallets." Marcus froze. "What?" "It's terrible, I know," Jessica continued, lowering her voice. "She seemed so sweet, but we found out she has a lot of debt. Desperate people do desperate things. We fired her on the spot and threatened to call the police. She ran off." Marcus stared at Jessica. He prided himself on reading people. That was how he made his billions. He looked at Jessica's shifting eyes, her sweaty forehead, the way she was wringing her hands. He didn't believe a word of it. Elena had turned down a bribe from his own translator. She had refused to let the Rossi brothers cheat him. A woman with that much integrity didn't steal wallets. "You're lying," Marcus said flatly. Jessica gasped. "Excuse me?" "I said you are lying." Marcus stepped closer, towering over her. "That woman saved a $600 million merger. She has a mind sharper than anyone in this room. And you expect me to believe she risked it all for a used wallet? I, Jessica stammered. I want her address, Marcus commanded. Now, from her employment file. That's confidential employee information, Jessica protested, trying to stand her ground. I can't just give it to you. Preston, Marcus said without looking away from Jessica. Yes, sir? Preston stepped forward. Call the landlord of this building. Buy the building. Then evict this restaurant. They have until noon to vacate. Yes, sir. Preston pulled out his phone. Jessica's face went white. She knew he could do it. He was Marcus Thorne. He could buy the block just to make a point. Wait! Jessica screamed. She scrambled behind the counter and pulled out a dusty file folder. Her hands were trembling so badly she dropped papers everywhere. Here! 42 West Vine Street, apartment 4B, Queens. That's the address. Please don't close us down. Marcus snatched the paper from her hand. He memorized the address. Preston, Marcus said, turning to leave. Sir? Don't buy the building. Jessica let out a breath of relief. Just buy the restaurant, Marcus said coldly over his shoulder, and fire the manager. He walked out, leaving Jessica screaming in the empty dining room as her world collapsed around her. Meanwhile, in a cramped, drafty apartment in Queens, Elena was sitting on the floor, surrounded by pill bottles. I'm sorry, Papa, she whispered into the phone. I lost the job. Her father's voice was weak on the other end of the line. He was in the hospital again. It's okay, Tesoro. Treasure, we will figure it out. Don't worry about the money. But they won't treat you without the next payment. Elena wiped a tear from her cheek. She looked at the bills spread out on the floor. $12,000 due by Friday. She had $40 in her bank account. She had applied to 3 cleaning jobs this morning. All of them paid minimum wage. It wasn't enough. She looked at the small bookshelf in the corner. Her old textbooks. Advanced linguistics. Renaissance history. Game theory. Useless. All useless. The world didn't care if you were smart. The world only cared if you had power. And she had none. She heard a car door slam outside. It sounded heavy, expensive, not the usual rattling taxis that came down her street. Then, footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, purposeful footsteps. Knock, knock, knock. Elena froze. It was probably the landlord coming for the late rent. She stayed silent, hoping he would go away. Elena Vance. A deep voice called through the thin wood of the door. I know you're in there. Elena's heart stopped. She knew that voice. It was the voice that commanded boardrooms, the voice that had ordered a vintage Chateau Margaux the night before. She scrambled to her feet and opened the door, just a crack, leaving the safety chain on. Marcus Thorne was standing in her dingy hallway. He was wearing a navy blue suit that cost more than her entire apartment building. Behind him stood Preston, looking nervous about the neighborhood. Mr. Thorne, Elena whispered, her eyes wide. How did you find me? You're hard to find, Elena, Marcus said, looking at her through the crack. He saw her red eyes. He saw the despair. May I come in? It's not. She looked around her messy, tiny apartment. It's not suitable for you. I don't care about the furniture, Marcus said gently. I care about the genius who lives here. Elena undid the chain and opened the door. Marcus stepped in. He looked around. He saw the peeling paint. He saw the unpaid medical bills spread on the floor. He saw the textbooks. He turned to her, and his expression softened. The shark of Wall Street was gone. Jessica told me you stole wallets, Marcus said. Elena flinched. I didn't. I swear. I know, Marcus said. I fired her. Well, actually, I bought the restaurant and had her fired. It seemed more efficient. Elena's jaw dropped. You bought the restaurant? I need a new place for lunch meetings anyway. Marcus waved his hand dismissively. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I have a problem, Elena. And you are the only person on this planet who can solve it. I don't understand, Elena said. I'm just a waitress. Stop saying that. Marcus stepped closer. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. You are a linguist, a strategist. And you just saved my company $600 million. Now I have to go to Tuscany. I have to inspect the Rossi factories personally to make sure their quality is real. I need a liaison, someone who speaks the language, knows the culture, and can spot a lie from a mile away. He reached into his pocket, but this time he didn't pull out a card. He pulled out a check. He placed it on the small, wobbly kitchen table. Elena looked at it. It was a check for $100,000 in advance. "Pack your bags, Elena," Marcus said. "We're going to Italy, and this time you won't be in the background. You'll be by my side." Elena looked at the check. It was her father's life. It was her freedom. She looked up at Marcus. "Why?" she asked. "Why do this for me?" Marcus paused at the door. He looked back at her, and for a second he looked vulnerable. "Because," he said quietly, "yesterday I was surrounded by people who wanted my money, my power, or my failure. You were the only one who just wanted to help. I don't forget that." He opened the door. "Car's downstairs. You have 1 hour." Elena stood in the center of her room, the check in her hand, her heart pounding like a drum. The waitress was dead. The partner was born. But she didn't know that in Italy, the Rossi brothers were already preparing a welcome. And they didn't like loose ends. The Gulfstream G650 jet cut through the clouds above the Atlantic like a silver needle. Inside, the cabin was quieter than the library Elena used to study in. Elena sat in a cream-colored leather seat, staring out the window. She was wearing a tailored black suit that Marcus's stylist had rushed over 3 hours ago. The waitress uniform was in a dumpster in Queens. Her debt was paid. Her father was in a private room at Mount Sinai with the best cardiologists in the state. It felt like a dream, but the man sitting across from her was very real. Marcus Thorne was reviewing files, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He looked up, catching her staring. "You're overthinking it," Marcus said, closing his laptop. "I'm terrified," Elena admitted. "Yesterday, I was serving water. Today I'm supposed to audit a billionaire's factory in Italy. What if I miss something?" Marcus stood up and walked over to her. He sat on the edge of the seat opposite hers. "You won't. You saw the calendar trap when my entire legal team missed it. You have an instinct for deceit, Elena. Probably because you've had to survive in a world that isn't fair. Use that." He poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. "Besides, Giovanni Rossi likes you. He thinks you have fire. But watch out for the sons. Lorenzo and Matteo are desperate. They've been bleeding the company dry to fund their gambling debts in Monte Carlo. I suspect they're hiding something worse than just bad accounting." The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, preparing for landing in Florence. The drive to the Rossi estate was breathtaking. Rolling hills of cypress trees and vineyards stretched endlessly under the golden Tuscan sun. But as the black Mercedes limousine pulled up to the iron gates of the Villa Rossi, the atmosphere shifted. The estate was more fortress than home. High stone walls, cameras on every corner, and guards who looked more like mercenaries than security. Giovanni Rossi met them at the grand entrance. He looked older in the sunlight, frail but dignified. "Benvenuta, Elena!" Giovanni cried, embracing her like a long-lost granddaughter. "I signor Thorne. Benvenuti a casa mia." "Thank you, Giovanni," Marcus said, shaking his hand. Behind Giovanni stood the brothers, Lorenzo and Matteo. They were not smiling. Lorenzo, the eldest, watched Elena with cold, reptilian eyes. He knew she was the reason their trap had failed in New York. "We have prepared the guest villa," Lorenzo said in English, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. "Please, rest. We will tour the factory tomorrow." "Actually," Marcus cut in, checking his watch, "we'd like to see the production floor now, while the shift is active." Lorenzo stiffened. "Now? But the workers are tired. The machines are noisy." "I like noise," Marcus said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Lead the way." The factory was located a mile behind the villa, a massive stone structure that had been processing silk for 300 years. Inside, the noise was deafening. Looms clattered rhythmically, weaving the golden threads that would become the world's most expensive ties and scarves. Elena walked a few steps behind Marcus and Giovanni. She wasn't looking at the machines. She was looking at the people. The workers kept their heads down. They didn't chat. They didn't smile. They looked terrified. Lorenzo and Matteo hovered close, steering Marcus away from certain aisles. "This way, Mr. Thorne. This is the new digital printing wing." Elena lingered behind. She pretended to tie her shoe near a group of workers loading boxes onto a pallet. One of the men, a young guy with grease on his face, muttered to another in a dialect so thick and fast it barely sounded like Italian. It was Sienese criminal slang, a code used by the local gangs. "La roba sporca via mezzanotte. Occhio agli americani." Elena's heart skipped a beat. She stood up slowly. "The dirty stuff goes out at midnight. Watch out for the Americans." "Elena?" Marcus called out from the front of the group. "Coming," she said brightly. She walked back to him, slipping her arm through his. It was a bold move, but she needed to whisper to him without the brothers hearing. She leaned up, pretending to admire the ceiling. "Midnight," she whispered into Marcus's ear, her breath warm against his neck. "They are moving illegal cargo tonight. The workers are terrified." Marcus didn't flinch. He placed his hand over hers on his arm, giving a gentle squeeze. "Understood," he said aloud. "This architecture is fascinating." The tour ended with a lavish dinner, but the food tasted like ash to Elena. She could feel Lorenzo's eyes boring into her. He knew she was watching. As they retired to the guest villa for the night, Marcus pulled Elena into his room and locked the door. "What exactly did you hear?" he asked, his voice low. "Slang," Elena explained, pacing the room. "Dirty stuff. In this region, that usually means one of two things: drugs or counterfeits. Given the machinery, I'd bet they are running a ghost shift." "A ghost shift?" "They use your raw materials and your machines at night to make off-the-books products," Elena said. "They sell them on the black market for 100% profit, tax-free. And since they use your materials, the inventory counts will be short. They're stealing from you before the merger even starts." Marcus's jaw tightened. If that's true, the deal is dead, and Giovanni is ruined. "I don't think Giovanni knows," Elena said. "The old man looks at that factory like it's a church. His sons are the ones running the floor." Marcus went to his suitcase and pulled out a flashlight and a small digital camera. He took off his suit jacket and rolled up his white sleeves. "Stay here," Marcus commanded. "I'm going to the factory." "No," Elena said, stepping in front of the door. "You don't know the dialect. If you get caught, you can't talk your way out. And you don't know the layout." "It's dangerous, Elena." "I grew up in a neighborhood in Queens where you didn't walk alone at night, and I spent 3 years in Italy navigating bureaucracy," Elena said, her eyes flashing. "I'm coming with you. Besides, you stick out like a sore thumb in that shirt." Marcus looked at her. He saw the fire Giovanni had talked about. He smirked, a genuine, rugged smile that made him look 10 years younger. "Fine," he said. "But you stay behind me." The Tuscan night was pitch black, the moon choked by heavy storm clouds. It was the only luck they had. Elena and Marcus moved through the rows of grapevines, the heavy scent of damp earth surrounding them. Ahead, the massive stone factory loomed. Unlike the afternoon, the main lights were extinguished, but the building wasn't asleep. A low, vibrating hum resonated through the ground, the sound of heavy machinery running at full capacity. "You were right," Marcus whispered, crouching behind a hedge. "They're running a third shift." They located a side-loading dock obscured by overgrown cypress trees. A guard stood by the door, lighting a cigarette. Marcus picked up a heavy stone and hurled it into the brush 20 yards away. Crunch. As the guard investigated the noise, Marcus signaled Elena. They slipped through the unlocked metal door, vanishing into the shadows of the factory floor. Inside, the air was thick with humidity and the smell of chemical dyes. Under the dim red glow of emergency lights, the factory was alive. Dozens of workers moved with frantic speed, their faces pale and anxious. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him behind a stack of pallets. "Look at the looms," she hissed. The machines were weaving a fabric that shimmered with an unnatural plastic sheen. Elena reached out and touched a scrap from a cutting table. "It's not silk," she whispered, her voice trembling with anger. "It's a synthetic blend. Cheap polyester mixed with low-grade refuse." "And look at the labels," Marcus said, his jaw tightening. At the finishing station, workers were sewing black tags onto the cheap scarves. They didn't say Rossi. They read, "Thorn Global, made in Italy." "They aren't just stealing from you," Elena realized. "They're destroying you. They are manufacturing counterfeits of your upcoming luxury line to flood the black market. When these fall apart in a week, your reputation will be ruined." Near the loading bay, Lorenzo Rossi stood with a man in a leather jacket, a known distributor for the Camorra Mafia. Lorenzo handed the man a thick envelope of cash. Marcus raised his small digital camera. Click, click. He captured the synthetic fabric, the fake labels, and the payoff. "We have enough," Marcus whispered. "Let's go." They turned to retreat, but in the darkness Marcus didn't see the loose metal grate on the floor. Clang. The sound echoed through the cavernous hall like a gunshot. The machinery seemed to freeze. Every head turned. Lorenzo spun around, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Chiche?" Who was there? He spotted the reflection of the camera lens. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He pulled a pistol from his waistband. "Run!" Marcus yelled. They sprinted toward the side exit, but two armed guards blocked the door. "Upstairs!" Elena shouted, pointing to the iron catwalk that overlooked the floor. "The fire escape is on the roof." They scrambled up the metal stairs. A bullet sparked off the railing inches from Elena's hand. "They're shooting!" Elena screamed. "They can't let us leave," Marcus panted, pulling her along the gantry. "If we talk, they go to prison for life." They reached the end of the catwalk, but the roof access was padlocked. They were trapped. Below, Lorenzo was shouting orders, and guards were rushing up the stairs on both sides. "In here!" Marcus pointed to a heavy steel door labeled Escatoio, the drying room. They burst inside, and Marcus spun the heavy locking wheel, sealing them in just as the guards reached the landing. The room was pitch black and stiflingly hot. It was an industrial oven, used to set the dye in the silk. Bang! Bang! The guards pounded on the steel door, but it held. "We're safe for a minute," Marcus gasped, leaning against the wall. "No," Elena said, her eyes widening in horror as she looked through the thick glass observation window. "We aren't." On the catwalk, Lorenzo was smiling. He wasn't trying to break the door down. He was standing at the external control panel. He made a slashing motion across his throat, then turned a large red dial to the right. Inside the room, the hum of the heaters deepened to a roar. Elena looked at the internal thermometer. It jumped from 40 degrees Celsius to 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit, in seconds. "He's going to cook us," she whispered. "The vent," Marcus pointed to a small grate near the ceiling. "I'll lift you. Kick it open." The heat was already becoming unbearable. Marcus, sweating profusely, laced his fingers together. Elena stepped into his hands, and he hoisted her up. She kicked the grate desperately, but it was rusted shut. "It won't move," she cried, the metal burning her skin. The temperature hit 60 degrees Celsius, 140 degrees Fahrenheit. It was getting hard to breathe. Lorenzo watched them through the glass, laughing, checking his watch. Suddenly, the pounding on the door stopped. Elena dropped down, gasping for air. Why did they stop? They looked through the window. Lorenzo wasn't looking at them anymore. He was staring at the end of the catwalk, his face drained of color. Standing there, clutching a double-barreled shotgun, was Giovanni Rossi. The old lion had woken up, and he looked at his son with eyes full of death. The shot had gone wide. In his panic, Lorenzo had fired too quickly. The bullet had grazed Giovanni's shoulder, sending the old man stumbling back against the railing, blood blossoming on his silk robe. "No!" Elena screamed. Lorenzo's hand was shaking. He swung the pistol back toward the drying room, aiming directly at Marcus through the shattered window. But the distraction had been enough. Marcus didn't wait. With a roar of effort, he slammed his shoulder against the steel door. The latch, already weakened by the heat and the bullet impact on the frame, groaned. He hit it again. Crack! The door swung open, spilling Marcus and Elena out onto the metal catwalk. They fell to the floor, gasping for the cooler air, their clothes soaked in sweat. Lorenzo turned the gun on them. His eyes were wild, the eyes of a trapped animal. "It's over, Lorenzo," Marcus shouted, shielding Elena with his body. "The police are already on their way. My assistant tracks my phone. When the signal died, he called the Carabinieri." "I can still kill you," Lorenzo screamed. "I can." Click. Lorenzo pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The gun had jammed. A cheap, black market weapon, just like the cheap, fake silk he had been peddling. Before Lorenzo could clear the chamber, a shadow moved behind him. Giovanni Rossi, clutching his bleeding shoulder, swung the butt of his shotgun with surprising strength. It connected with the back of Lorenzo's knees. Lorenzo crumpled to the ground, screaming. Suddenly, the factory doors burst open. Blue lights flooded the dark manufacturing floor. "Polizia! Mani in alto! Police! Hands up!" Preston ran in behind a squad of armored officers. "Mr. Thorne! Elena!" Lorenzo was pinned to the ground and handcuffed. The corrupt guards surrendered immediately. As the paramedics rushed up the stairs to tend to Giovanni, the old man waved them away for a moment. He looked at his son being dragged away, tears streaming down his face. Then he looked at Marcus and Elena. Giovanni reached out his good hand. Elena took it. "Mi dispiace," Giovanni whispered, his voice broken. "Scusa per tutto." "I am sorry. Sorry for everything." "It wasn't you, Giovanni," Elena said softly, wiping soot from her face. "It was never you." 1 month later, the elevator to the penthouse suite of Thorne Tower in Manhattan opened with a soft chime. Elena Vance stepped out. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a tailored cream suit from the Rossi Heritage Collection, the real collection. Her hair was styled, and she walked with the confidence of someone who belonged at the top of the world. She walked past the reception desk where secretaries whispered in awe. "Good morning, Miss Vance," they chirped. Elena smiled. She walked into the main boardroom. The same room where, weeks ago, she had feared for her father's life because of a medical bill. Marcus Thorne was at the head of the table. The board of directors was seated, looking at the quarterly projections. The acquisition of Rossi Textiles was complete. The Ghost Shift had been dismantled, and the Rossi brand was stronger than ever, marketed as a survivor of corruption. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, standing up as Elena entered, "I believe you all know the woman who saved this company." Elena took her seat at the right hand of the CEO. "We have a new position to announce," Marcus continued. "Elena is not just our liaison. She is the new Director of International Operations. Nothing gets signed, nothing gets said, and nothing gets translated without her approval." The board members nodded respectfully. They had heard the stories. They knew she had walked through fire, literally, for the deal. After the meeting, the room cleared out, leaving only Marcus and Elena. Marcus walked over to the window, looking out at the city. "Your father?" "Discharged yesterday," Elena said, her voice warm. "The surgery was a success. He's already complaining about the hospital food. He wants pasta." "We can arrange that," Marcus smiled. He turned to face her. "You know, Elena, that night at l'Orangerie, I was ready to give up on people. Everyone wanted something. Everyone was lying." He stepped closer. The chemistry that had sparked in the restaurant and survived the Italian oven was now undeniable. Then a waitress spoke up, Marcus said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and she spoke the only language that matters, truth. Elena looked up at him. "I just didn't want the risotto to go cold." Marcus laughed, a deep, genuine sound. He leaned in, and this time there were no burning contracts, no gunshots, and no managers to stop them. He kissed her. It was a kiss that promised a future brighter than the Tuscan sun Elena Vance had started as the girl nobody noticed. Now, she was the one woman the world would never forget. And that is the incredible story of Elena and Marcus. From a humiliated waitress to a high-powered executive, Elena proved that true value isn't about the uniform you wear, but the brilliance you hide inside. She faced down a mafia ring, saved a billion-dollar legacy, and found love in the most dangerous place on earth. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please give this video a massive like. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that their big break is just around the corner. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss the next dramatic adventure. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.